UFC lightweight champion Ilia Topuria and top contender Arman Tsarukyan continue to trade shots as their rivalry intensifies, with both men clearly unwilling to back down. Topuria, now the man holding the gold at 155 pounds, finds himself with multiple challengers lining up to face him, but the one name that continued to provoke the strongest reaction from him is Tsarukyan. While Justin Gaethje, Max Holloway, and Paddy Pimblett are all in the mix for a potential title shot, it's Tsarukyan's presence that seems to trigger the most tension, and for good reason. The two fighters have made it clear through interviews and online exchanges that there's no love lost between them. Topuria doesn't trust Tsarukyan as a reliable opponent, pointing to his history of withdrawing from fights, most notably his title opportunity against Islam Makhachev, which he missed due to a back injury sustained during his weight cut. That kind of thing seems to really irk Topuria, who doesn't want to prepare for someone he feels might not even make it to the cage. Listen, when you put so much effort in the game, and you have a guy in front who you don't know that maybe he could pull out from the fight, that's not something good for us, Topuria said in a sharp interview. He followed that up with a more emphatic rejection of the idea that Tsarukyan deserves a shot at his title anytime soon. They are going to give him a fight before the title shot, because there is no way. I'm the world champion, I'm never going to give him a chance to fight for the title. I will be like, listen, if that's the case, take my belt. I don't do it. That defiance hasn't gone unnoticed, and Tsarukyan has fired back, questioning the mindset of a champion who's already finding excuses not to fight him. In his blunt response, Tsarukyan didn't mince words. Imagine calling yourself a champion, but you're already looking for a way out. You can vacate it, or I'll take it. Either way, it's mine. That kind of back and forth adds real heat to what's already a compelling situation. Topuria may have the belt and the momentum, but Tsarukyan has the credentials, and his style could pose a very real threat. The lightweight division is once again brimming with talent and drama, but this particular feud feels personal. It's not just about rankings or resume anymore. This is about pride, trust, and legitimacy. Topuria has options, but the one name he keeps trying to distance himself from is the one who might offer him the stiffest test. Whether or not the UFC eventually forces the issue remains to be seen, but one thing's for sure. Tsarukyan isn't going away, and if Topuria truly wants to reign as the undisputed best, he may eventually have no choice but to face the man he's so adamantly dismissing. Until then, expect the verbal shots to keep flying. Robert Whittaker is entering UFC Abu Dhabi with a fire in his eyes and a chip on his shoulder. Set to face Reneer de Ridder in the main event of what's shaping up to be a critical middleweight clash, Whittaker isn't just aiming to rebound from his recent loss. He's looking to remind everyone exactly who he is. After coming up short against Khamzat Chimaev earlier this year, Whittaker is determined to not just win, but to do it emphatically. And when it comes to his opponent this Saturday, he isn't shy about how he feels. De Ridder hasn't faced anyone close to his level. He hasn't fought anyone like me, Whittaker said at UFC Abu Dhabi Media Day. Landing my mitts and getting my hands on him, that's the plan. I'm fast. My striking I think is better than his, so I've got to find the holes, the openings, and close them up. The former middleweight champion is banking on his speed, power, and elite-level striking to break through de Ridder's defenses. Whittaker's confidence comes not just from bravado, but from a resume built on years of fighting and beating, the best at 185 pounds. Whether it was wars with Yoel Romero, clinical performances against Jared Cannonier and Darren Till, or his destruction of Ikram Aliskerov, Whittaker has repeatedly shown he belongs at the top. As far as strategy goes, Whittaker expects de Ridder to immediately try and close the distance, looking to get the fight to the mat. He knows the Dutchman's grappling credentials, especially coming off dominant wins over Kevin Holland and Bo Nickel, and anticipates a wrestling-heavy game plan. But he's ready for that too. He's going to try to take me down straight away, I envision, Whittaker said. He's got good striking, good stand-up, but he understands where my strengths are, he understands where his strengths may lie, and I think he'll want to go to the ground to utilize that. Still, Whittaker doesn't seem fazed by the threat of a takedown. His defensive wrestling has been one of his most underrated tools over the years, and his ability to keep fights standing or survive scrambles has helped him stay consistently at the elite level. "I've fought some of the best wrestlers in the sport," Whittaker added. "I've faced guys with dangerous grappling, top control, chain wrestling, you name it. This won't be anything new to me." With odds makers listing him as the favorite heading into the UFC Abu Dhabi headliner, Whittaker is looking to use this fight as a launchpad. A win over a surging Reinier de Ridder, especially one that comes via finish, puts him right back into the title conversation. And with the middleweight division currently in flux, between Dricus du Plessis's reign, Khamzat's inconsistencies, and questions around who's truly next, Whittaker knows that one statement win could be all it takes to force his name back into the mix. So don't expect a cautious, point-fighting version of the Reaper this Saturday. Whittaker has a mission, and de Ridder is simply the next man standing in the way. Tatiana Suarez is wasting no time in getting back on track. The former Ultimate Fighter winner has officially booked her return to action following the first loss of her professional career, and it's a big one. Suarez is set to face Brazilian standout Amanda Limos in a high-stakes strawweight bout at Noche UFC 3, scheduled for September 13th in San Antonio. The card will be headlined by a featherweight clash between rising contenders Diego Lopes and John Silva, but all eyes will be on Suarez's rebound effort. Ranked number 3 at strawweight and number 12 pound for pound in MMA Fighting's global rankings, Suarez, 10-1, will be stepping into the octagon for the first time since her unanimous decision loss to champion Zhang Weili at UFC 312. That fight marked Suarez's long-awaited title opportunity, a moment nearly 9 years in the making since her dominant run through the Ultimate Fighter season 23. The result was a letdown for Suarez, who entered the bout unbeaten and riding a wave of momentum that included impressive wins over elite names such as Jessica Andrade, Carla Esparza, and Alexa Grasso. Despite the loss, Suarez remains one of the most dangerous threats in the division, with elite grappling and a suffocating style that has overwhelmed nearly every opponent she's faced. Her opponent, Amanda Limos, 15-4, currently sits at number 6 in the strawweight rankings and brings considerable firepower into the matchup. Since her failed title bid against Zhang Weili in 2023, Limos has remained active and resilient, picking up decision victories over Mackenzie Dern and Yasmin Lucindo, while falling short via submission against Verna Jandiroba in a bout where she was outgrappled. A former Jungle Fight champion, Limos owns a 9-4 UFC record with an impressive 5 finishes, having stopped contenders like Michelle Waterson-Gomez and Marina Rodriguez. Her striking power and fight IQ make her a dangerous test for any top 5 strawweight. For Suarez, this is a critical moment, not just to bounce back from her first professional defeat, but to reassert herself as a legitimate title threat in one of the UFC's deepest women's divisions. Meanwhile, a win for Limos could thrust her right back into the title picture and prove that she belongs among the elite at 115 pounds. The stakes are high, and with both fighters looking to make a statement, Suarez vs. Limos could very well steal the show in San Antonio. Sean Strickland's career is currently in a strange limbo, caught between suspension, controversy, and restlessness. The former UFC middleweight champion hasn't competed since his razor-close loss to Dricus du Plessis at UFC 312, and since then, the headlines surrounding him have shifted from cage performances to cage invasions, literally. Earlier this year, Strickland made waves after storming the cage at a regional MMA event in Las Vegas, where he punched a fighter moments after the bout ended. An impulsive act in defense of a teammate, but one that has since triggered serious consequences. The Nevada State Athletic Commission, NSAC, which sanctioned the event, quickly moved to investigate, and now Strickland finds himself suspended indefinitely. According to recent reports, that suspension has been extended until at least August, pending a full disciplinary hearing or a formal resolution. But that hasn't stopped Strickland from stirring the pot or exploring alternative ways to keep fighting, even if it means stepping outside the UFC altogether. In a recent comment captured by Happy Punch, Strickland responded to a fan by saying, quote, "Yeah man, dark days indeed. Anyone want to have an exhibition boxing match?" It's not just posturing either. This isn't the first time the 34-year-old has flirted with boxing. He's previously taken shots at Jake Paul and hinted at a willingness to lace up gloves in the squared circle. However, there's a problem. Strickland's UFC contract and NSAC suspension likely prevent him from competing in any legitimate combat sports bout, even outside the octagon. Most professional boxing events fall under the jurisdiction of state athletic commissions, including Nevada's, which means, unless Strickland finds a loophole or waits out his punishment, he's essentially sidelined from sanctioned combat for the foreseeable future. Meanwhile, talk of his UFC future continues to bubble. Israel Adesanya recently called him out for a rematch, but according to Izzy, Strickland isn't biting. Instead, the Californian appears more interested in fighting welterweight contender Belal Muhammad, a peculiar matchup given the weight class discrepancy, but also very on-brand for Strickland, whose career has never followed a predictable trajectory. Whether that fight makes sense or not is beside the point. What matters is that Strickland is itching to get back in there. The problem is, with no fights on the calendar, a suspension hanging over his head, and his behavior putting him in hot water, the path forward isn't exactly clear. Right now, Sean Strickland is at a crossroads. He's one of the UFC's most polarizing figures, outspoken, erratic, unfiltered, but he's also one of its most compelling. Love him or hate him, fans watch when he fights. The UFC knows that. But with his status under review, and the promotion remaining relatively silent on his future, it's unclear whether Strickland will return to the octagon soon, or if he'll be forced to sit on the sidelines and watch others climb the ladder he once stood atop. If the NSAC doesn't lift the suspension soon, or if the UFC doesn't offer him a viable return path, don't be surprised if Strickland continues pushing for an unsanctioned boxing exhibition, or looks to stir the pot just enough to pressure his way back into relevance. One thing is certain. Strickland isn't built to sit quietly and wait, and if the system won't let him fight the way he wants, he's already looking for the next way around it. Justin Gaethje is making it clear that while he isn't necessarily demanding a title shot, he's grown increasingly frustrated with how the UFC is handling his career at this stage. Known for his all-action fighting style and years of dedication to the sport, Gaethje finds himself in an awkward spot. He's ranked near the top of the lightweight division, he's coming off a strong win over Rafael Fiziev, and yet he's been bypassed in the title picture, again. The former interim champion has competed for the undisputed belt twice and fell short both times, but he's far from washed up. At 36, he remains dangerous and active, with 3 wins in his last 4 outings and a resume that includes victories over some of the most dangerous names in the division. Despite all that, the UFC seems to be pointing in other directions. Names like Paddy Pimblett and Arman Tsarukyan are being thrown around for top contender bouts, which Gaethje finds not only disrespectful, but deeply illogical. The idea of fighting Pimblett especially seems insulting to him. In his eyes, facing someone that inexperienced at the top level would not only be a step back, but a signal from the UFC that they no longer value his place in the hierarchy. His frustration spilled over in an interview with ESPN, where he was blunt in saying that if the UFC sees fit to throw him into a gatekeeper role, then he may have to seriously rethink his future with the promotion. What's particularly eating at Gaethje is how others seem to be fast-tracked. He points to Ilia Topuria's rise and the chaos surrounding the belt ever since Islam Makhachev was linked to a welterweight jump. When the title was vacated, Gaethje hoped the UFC would consider him a frontrunner. Instead, Topuria scored a thunderous KO of Charles Oliveira at UFC 317 and was immediately paired with Paddy Pimblett for a bizarre in-cage stare-down orchestrated by Joe Rogan, one Dana White later distanced himself from. Gaethje wasn't buying the theater. He was in the crowd that night with his nephew, and noticed the UFC's production crew trying to pull him into the camera frame alongside Tsarukyan, seemingly laying groundwork for another matchup Gaethje never agreed to or asked for. His reaction was unfiltered and fiery. He rejected the setup outright and refused to play into the narrative, swearing at the production team to back off. Gaethje's frustration isn't necessarily that he's fighting tough guys. He's always been up for a war. It's that the UFC seems to be treating him like a utility piece, someone they can throw into high-risk, low-reward situations to test newer names. He already passed that test years ago, and now he's wondering why he's still being asked to do it again. Especially when he took a high-level fight with Fiziev, won, and still didn't get clarity on a title opportunity. He even pointed out that Tsarukyan had already pulled out of a previous matchup due to injury, something Gaethje finds very different from his own willingness to step in and deliver when the UFC asked. And while Gaethje hasn't outright said he'd retire if the matchmaking continues to go against him, there's a tone of finality in his words. He says he still has the desire to compete, something he wouldn't claim if he were truly thinking about walking away. But he doesn't want to be stuck in a holding pattern either. He's tired of the idea that if he wins a big fight, the reward is simply being asked to fight another contender who could leapfrog him. That cycle, to him, doesn't reflect a merit-based system, and he's only interested in competing under a structure that respects his accomplishments. In the end, Justin Gaethje's message is clear. He's earned more than what the UFC is currently offering him. He's willing to fight anyone, but only if it makes sense, only if it leads to something greater. Otherwise, he may have to step back and reconsider why he's still doing this at all. Joe Rogan has called countless fights and interviewed dozens of champions, but few athletes have left him as baffled as Dricus du Plessis. The reigning UFC middleweight champion has impressed with his grit, power, and resilience, but according to Rogan, it's his sheer size that's truly staggering. As du Plessis gears up for a title defense against the dangerous Khamzat Chimaev at UFC 319, Rogan took time on a recent episode of the JRE MMA show to voice a thought many fans have had. How in the world does Dricus make 185 pounds? During his conversation with UFC light heavyweight Khalil Rountree Jr., Rogan began by reflecting on the size differences in MMA divisions, noting how Rountree, though 6'1" and muscular, is still considered on the smaller end of the 205-pound division. That's when Rogan pivoted to Dricus, dropping a jaw-dropping observation. There's a lot of guys like Dricus, who's bigger than you, who's the middleweight champion. He's huge, man. It's the opposite thing, right? He's cutting a ton of weight. Every time I interview him, I'm like, how the F are you 185 pounds? Rogan's disbelief isn't without reason. Du Plessis, nicknamed Stillknox, doesn't just fight like a big middleweight, he is a big middleweight. In fact, outside of fight camps, he reportedly walks around between 224 and 231 pounds. That puts him firmly in light heavyweight territory, and depending on how much he balloons between weigh-ins and fight night, it's possible he's stepping into the cage as a de facto heavyweight. He looks like a heavyweight, and he is a heavyweight when he fights, Rogan continued. I mean, he's over 205 for sure. The size difference is real. While some middleweights hover just above the 200-pound mark outside of camp, du Plessis seems to have the frame of a true 205 fighter. In a previous interview, Dricus himself admitted to letting loose after fights, enjoying his food, beer, and downtime to unwind before getting back into full training mode. That's me, like 3 to 4 weeks after a fight. Then you're training, eating whatever you didn't eat in the last 12 weeks, drinking a lot of beer and enjoying life. Despite his impressive size and strength, du Plessis' success at middleweight has been more than just physical. His pressure, unorthodox timing, and cardio make him a nightmare matchup for most. But he'll need everything in his arsenal to fend off Khamzat Chimaev, the undefeated Chechen-born phenom known for his relentless grappling and aggression. Chimaev presents perhaps the most dangerous challenge of du Plessis' career, and not just stylistically. While Chimaev has yet to hold UFC gold, his aura of invincibility and ferocity has built him into one of the sport's biggest rising stars. A win over Dricus would solidify him as one of the most dominant forces in the UFC. But one man seems firmly in Duplessis' corner already: Joe Rogan. Despite his skepticism about the weight cut, Rogan clearly respects what Duplessis brings to the cage: size, power, pressure, and an undeniable will to win. As the MMA world counts down to UFC 319, one thing is clear: Duplessis may fight at middleweight, but in Rogan's eyes, he's built like something much bigger. And that might just be the X factor when the cage door closes against Chimaev. Shara Nurmagomedov isn't dwelling on the loss that ended his perfect record. In fact, he never cared much about preserving an undefeated streak in the first place. After 4 explosive performances under the UFC banner, the Dagestani striker known as Bullet tasted defeat for the first time in February. At UFC Saudi Arabia, he went 3 rounds with former Bellator standout Michael Venom Page, ultimately falling by unanimous decision. The loss brought his unblemished 15-0 record to a halt, but Nurmagomedov says the pressure to remain undefeated never weighed on him the way it does for some fighters. Fighters with 0 losses often say that the weight of that record is heavy when they fight, that they worry a lot about the numbers, Nurmagomedov said ahead of his UFC Abu Dhabi return. But my feeling before this fight is different from before the last one. I was never worried about that 0, unlike some of my fans who were. Now, Nurmagomedov looks to rebound on one of the UFC's biggest international stages. He'll square off against Canadian middleweight veteran Marc-Andre Barriault this Saturday at Etihad Arena in Abu Dhabi. For Bullet, this is more than just a bounce-back opportunity. It's a chance to re-establish his status as one of the most dangerous, unorthodox strikers in the division. Barriault, a fan favorite known as Power Bar, isn't coming in cold. He's fresh off a statement win, having stopped Bruno Silva in just 87 seconds at UFC 315. That victory snapped a frustrating 3-fight skid for the Canadian, and with his confidence renewed, he'll be looking to halt the Nurmagomedov hype train once and for all. Nurmagomedov, however, has no plans of letting his first loss derail his momentum. His goals remain ambitious and clear. "I'm pretty sure with this victory and maybe 2-3 more fights that I'm going to be right there, right back at the top of the division," he said. "Potentially, I'll be breathing already in the back of the top 5 if I show 1-2 good finishes, and I'll be right there. I'll be in the talks to potentially get the rematch." That rematch, of course, would be against Michael Page, who now finds himself in the mix among the UFC's elite welterweights. But for Nurmagomedov, getting another crack at MVP isn't about revenge. It's about proving that one loss doesn't define a career. He's still young, still evolving, and still every bit the threat he was before Saudi Arabia. And if he gets past Barriault in Abu Dhabi, that climb back to the top begins in earnest.